Let's jump right into this explainer. When most people hear the word Leviticus, they immediately think of this archaic, dusty rulebook just filled with bizarre ancient laws, right? But actually, when we look closely at the source material, we find something entirely different. It's not just a random list of rules. It is a high-stakes, brilliantly engineered architecture of survival. So we're going to unpack exactly how this text functioned as a literal life-saving blueprint for an ancient people. To really grasp just how high the stakes are here, we actually have to start with this terrifying narrative anchor found right in the middle of the text. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, step into the sanctuary, and they offer what the text calls unauthorized fire. And the result? Instant incineration. Fire comes out from the presence of the Lord and literally consumes them on the spot. It's shocking, but it vividly establishes the immediate, lethal danger of getting too close to the divine without following the exact protocol. Which brings us to the central, literal life or death question driving the entire text. How do you survive a holy God? We have to completely reframe everything we're about to look at. Think of it less like arbitrary religious regulations and more like an engineered solution. Imagine a mortal, flawed community trying to live right next door to a force of absolute terrifying purity. Leviticus, well, it's basically the manual for making sure the entire camp doesn't just go up in smoke. To navigate this dangerous terrain, we're going to look at the architecture of holiness, examine the divine nuclear reactor at the center of the camp, talk about blood as ritual detergent, explore the Holiness Code, objectively compare two perspectives on its origins, and finally, unpack its modern legacy. All right, Section 1, the architecture of holiness, building walls with behaviors. Okay, the absolute crucial point here is understanding this Hebrew word kadosh. We usually translate it as holiness, but at its core, it fundamentally means the act of separation. It's all about setting apart the sacred from the common, dividing order from pure chaos. You see, in the harsh wilderness, you survive by creating boundaries, and kadosh is that ultimate boundary line protecting the community from absolute collapse. And the camp itself is basically laid out as a physical map of this exact separation. Picture it. We walk from the harsh, unforgiving Sinai desert on the outside, which represents total chaos. Then we step inward into the ordered tribal tents. Keep going, and we pass through the Levite buffer zone, essentially a literal human shield of priests. And finally, we hit the ultimate locus of heat and order right at the absolute center, which is the tabernacle. Moving inward, we hit Section 2, the divine nuclear reactor, proximity to power. Now, the source material naturally suggests this totally fascinating metaphor. The divine presence is treated exactly like a nuclear reactor. Think about it. It's absolutely essential for the power and the life of the community, but it's instantly fatal if you approach it without the exact protocol. In our modern world, we often view strict discipline as, restrictive or annoying, but here, the ironclad discipline of the priesthood is quite literally the only thing keeping the community alive. So to manage this reactor, the text sets up these really strict binary opposites. We see all these purity laws regulating diet, childbirth, skin diseases, bodily fluids, but it's incredibly important to understand that these aren't just ancient health codes. Actually, scratch that. They aren't health codes at all. They're profound theological categories. Anything associated with the loss of life, so decay, disease, uncontrolled blood, all of that represents impurity and death absolutely cannot be allowed to coexist in the same space as the God of life. This intense management of purity all culminates in chapter 16 with Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Once a year, the high priest has to pass through all those boundaries we talked about, entering the deepest, most dangerous chamber of the tabernacle to cleanse the entire nation. It features this striking, super visual ritual where the sins and impurities of the camp are symbolically placed right on the head of a scapegoat. Then that goat is physically driven out of the camp, essentially returning chaos right back out into the chaotic wilderness where it belongs. This brings us to Section 3, Blood as Ritual Detergent, the Ritual Economy. We really have to remember that sacrifice in the ancient world wasn't just some abstract, symbolic thing. It was a visceral, sensory, and highly economic experience. The text outlines these distinct offerings that were designed to act almost like a spiritual sponge. Human failure and malice were viewed as this very real spiritual contagion that literally polluted the camp. So these offerings acted as a way to absorb and neutralize that debt. Blood, which represented the sacred force of life, essentially acted as a ritual detergent. It wiped the sanctuary clean so that the divine presence could safely remain among the people. And this reveals a radical shift when we compare Israel to its ancient neighbors. In surrounding empires, places like Babylon, maintaining purity was pretty much just the job of the king and the temple elites. It was highly restricted, mostly just designed to maintain their own power. But Leviticus, it radically democratizes this whole process. The entire camp is made responsible for managing the spiritual contagion. Every single person plays a critical role in the survival of the whole community. It's a real game changer. Let's look at how this spreads in Section 4, the Holiness Code, radiating outward. The ultimate takeaway here is that holiness isn't just trapped inside the tabernacle. About halfway through Leviticus, the focus completely shifts outward with this command, "Be holy, for I am holy." Holiness starts to dictate everything. It dictates sexual boundaries, how you farm your land, how you execute justice in the courtrooms, and crucially, how you treat the poor and the marginalized living right next door to you. And this brings us to an incredibly powerful number found late in the text, 50. This single number represents the Jubilee year. And you guys, it is arguably one of the most groundbreaking economic blueprints of the entire ancient world. The Jubilee was basically a massive, radical reset button for society. Every 50 years, all debts were canceled. Enslaved people were freed. Ancestral land was returned right back to its original tribal owners. It was specifically designed to act as a fail-safe, preventing multi-generational poverty and absolute wealth centralization. It made sure that no family could ever permanently fall out of the economic system. Let's zoom out a bit for Section 5. Origins, two perspectives, academic versus traditional. The source material presents two vital lenses for understanding the origins of this text, and we're going to look at both of them completely impartially. On the one hand, the academic view sees Leviticus as a post-exilic compilation. Basically, it was finalized by priests trying to preserve their identity after the destruction of their temple, creating a portable, indestructible architecture for a people who suddenly found themselves without a physical nation. On the other hand, the traditional view holds that this was direct, unfiltered dictation from God straight to Moses at the foot of Mount Sinai, establishing eternal standards for the chosen lineage. Scholars also identify these distinct inner layers within the text. So on one side we have P, the priestly source, which authored the vast majority of the book. And P is deeply obsessed with sanctuary order, strict boundaries, and precise ritual execution. But then, chapters 17 through 26 are identified as H, the Holiness Code. And while P focuses strictly on the sanctuary, H takes that concept of holiness and pushes it all the way out into the everyday lives, the farms, and the courtrooms of the common people. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the modern legacy, atonement and justice. Even though the physical sacrifices have long ceased, the ideas behind them definitely have not. Leviticus established these profound psychological and philosophical frameworks that literally still directly influence modern Western thought. It shaped how we think about guilt, the basic necessity of atonement, and the absolute sanctity of life. Furthermore, its radical concepts of social safety nets, like the Jubilee we just talked about, laid some of the earliest groundwork for how a society should protect its most marginalized members from systemic economic collapse. Which brings us to the end of our architectural tour, and I really want to leave you with this provocative thought. Obviously, we no longer use blood and literal scapegoats to manage our collective guilt or societal imbalances. But looking around at our world today, what exactly are our modern frameworks for atonement? And as wealth centralizes more and more, and debts mount higher and higher, do we have a jubilee to reset our systems? Think about it. How do we manage our own architecture of survival and justice today?